Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
Back in 1993, my wife and I were finally ready to buy our first real home. We've been saving for years, living in a cramped apartment and dreaming of having our own place with a yard. When we found this house on a large corner lot, it seemed perfect. The property had just been divided from the neighbor's land and sold as two separate parcels. We bought both pieces, the main lot where the house sat, and a smaller back parcel that connected to the side road. The real estate agent mentioned that the back piece was originally meant to be a second driveway for the neighbor, but there had been some mix-up in the paperwork and it ended up being sold to us instead. We didn't think much of it at the time. We had the deed, everything was legal, and we were just excited to finally own property. That excitement didn't last long. 3 days after we moved in, I was unpacking boxes in our bedroom when I noticed an old man standing right outside our window. Not walking by, just standing there staring at our house. When I looked out, he quickly shuffled away. I figured it was just curiosity about the new neighbors. The next morning he was back. Same spot, same stare. This time I went outside to introduce myself. I greeted him and tried to be friendly, explaining that I was his new neighbor. But the old man looked me up and down with obvious annoyance and told me I was standing on his property. When I asked what he meant, he pointed to the back parcel and claimed it was his land, insisting that I couldn't just steal from him. I tried to stay calm and reasonable, explaining that there might be some confusion since we had the deed for both parcels and everything had gone through proper legal channels. But he didn't care what any papers said. He was convinced the land was his and promised to make sure everyone knew it. From that day forward, he made it his mission to remind us that he considered the back parcel his property. Every single day he would walk over and stand right in front of our bedroom windows for at least an hour, sometimes longer. It was like he was marking his territory or something. My wife started closing the curtains during the day because it made her uncomfortable. We couldn't enjoy our morning coffee in bed without seeing this grumpy old man glaring at us through the glass. I tried talking to him several more times over the next few weeks. I told him I understood he was upset about the mix-up, but reminded him that I had the legal deed and the property line wasn't going to change. He insisted his lawyer was looking into it and promised we'd see about that. When I asked if he could please stop standing in front of our windows because it was making my wife nervous, he declared he would stand wherever he wanted on his own property. It was impossible to reason with him. The guy was absolutely convinced that some conspiracy had stolen his land, and nothing I said made any difference. His lawyer apparently told him the same thing I did, that we owned it fair and square, but he refused to accept it. The whole situation was making our lives miserable. We'd worked so hard to buy this house, and now we couldn't even enjoy it. My wife was talking about maybe we should just move somewhere else. The neighbor's wife was barely ever seen. From what I could tell, she had trouble getting around and spent most of her time inside watching television. They had this huge satellite dish in their backyard, one of those old-style dishes that looked like something you'd use to communicate with space. The thing was massive. I started noticing that whenever their TV was acting up, the old man would get even more irritable than usual. I could hear him yelling at repair technicians who came out to fix whatever was wrong with their satellite system. It seemed like they were having problems pretty regularly. That's when I got an idea. At the time, I was working for a wireless communications company. Part of my job involved testing radio frequency equipment, and I had access to some pretty sophisticated gear that could generate various types of signals. I knew enough about satellite communications to understand how they worked and what could interfere with them. If this guy wanted to spend his time obsessing over property lines instead of leaving us alone, maybe I could give him something else to obsess over. I set up a signal generator in my garage positioned to create interference with their satellite dish. But I didn't want it to be obvious. That would just cause more problems. Instead, I programmed it on a timer. Every hour their signal would cut out for exactly 10 minutes before the hour and come back 10 minutes after. This meant they would consistently miss the opening and closing segments of every TV show they tried to watch. The results were immediate. Within 2 days, I could hear the old man outside cursing at his satellite dish. He climbed up on a ladder, adjusted the positioning, checked all the cables. Nothing worked. The signal kept cutting out at the exact same times every single hour. I heard him ranting about how the damn thing had worked fine for years and was now acting up every day. His wife wasn't happy either. I could hear her complaining from inside their house about missing the beginnings and endings of all her programs. The old man called out repair technicians 3 different times in the first week. Of course, whenever the technicians showed up during the day, the signal worked perfectly. My interference was designed to be completely undetectable unless you knew exactly what to look for. The repair guys would test everything, declare the system working fine, and leave. Then the problems would start again that evening. This went on for about 3 weeks. The old man was so busy trying to figure out what was wrong with his satellite that he stopped his daily routine of standing in front of our windows. Finally, we could open our curtains and enjoy our bedroom again. One afternoon, I was working in my front yard when I saw him up on his ladder again, frantically adjusting the dish position. I asked if he was having trouble with his satellite, and he explained that the piece of junk kept cutting out. He'd had 4 different technicians out there, and none of them could figure out what was wrong. I mentioned that I worked in wireless communications and knew a bit about satellite systems, offering to take a look. His attitude changed completely. Suddenly, I wasn't the guy who'd stolen his land. I was his potential savior. He eagerly accepted my help, explaining that his wife was about ready to throw the TV out the window. I climbed up his ladder and pretended to examine the dish carefully. I wiggled some cables, checked the connections, and made a big show of measuring signal angles. Then I told him I thought I saw the problem. His focal point was slightly off. I explained that when the temperature changed throughout the day, the metal expanded and contracted just enough to throw off his signal reception, claiming it was a common issue with dishes that size. I made a few meaningless adjustments and tightened some bolts that didn't need tightening. I told him that should stabilize it, but explained that the real fix was in the electronics. I claimed his receiver was trying to compensate for the focal shift, but was overcorrecting, and that I'd adjusted the sensitivity settings to account for the thermal expansion. It was complete nonsense, but it sounded technical enough to be believable. He was amazed and said it made perfect sense, mentioning that none of the other technicians had said anything about thermal expansion. That night, I turned off my interference signal permanently. Their satellite worked perfectly from then on. 3 days later, the old man knocked on our front door with a huge smile on his face. He said he didn't know how to thank me enough, and that whatever I'd done had fixed it completely. He explained that they hadn't had a single problem since I looked at it, and that his wife was so happy she'd been baking all morning. He handed me a plate of homemade cookies and admitted that he thought he may have been a bit unfriendly when we first moved in. He said he'd been stressed about some legal issues, but that was all sorted out now, and he hoped we could be good neighbors going forward. I told him we'd like nothing more than to get along with everyone in the neighborhood. From that day forward, he was the friendliest neighbor you could ask for. He never mentioned the property dispute again, never stood in front of our windows, and even helped me fix my lawnmower when it broke down later that summer. His wife started waving at us from her window, and they both always made sure to say hello whenever we saw them outside. We lived in that house for 12 more years, and he remained a great neighbor the entire time. The store I worked at has been family-owned for decades, and it had this old-school charm that the big box stores just don't have. Regular customers would come in and we'd catch up about their home improvement projects, their families, whatever. There was this one old gentleman who came in every Saturday morning to browse around and pick up odds and ends. He'd always tell me about whatever project he was working on in his garage, and I'd suggest different tools or materials that might help. It was nice, made the job feel more human. But then our new manager started about 6 months ago. He came from some corporate retail chain and had all these ideas about maximizing efficiency and streamlining customer interactions. From day one, he made it clear that he thought we were all too casual with customers. He'd hover around the register area timing how long each transaction took, and making notes on his clipboard. Last week, things came to a head. I was helping that same elderly regular customer I mentioned. He was telling me about this bookshelf he was building for his granddaughter, and he wasn't sure what kind of wood stain would work best. We were looking at different options, and I was explaining the differences between oil-based and water-based stains. It was maybe a 5-minute conversation, and I was genuinely helping him make the right choice. But the manager was watching the whole time, and when the customer left, he pulled me aside. He asked me what that whole conversation was about, and when I explained I was helping the customer pick the right stain for his project, he got really upset. He told me that wasn't my job and that I was wasting too much time with customers. He said my job was to scan items, take payment, and move on to the next customer, nothing more. I tried to explain that the customer was a regular and that he actually bought more because I helped him understand the different options, but the manager didn't care. He was getting red in the face, really worked up about this. He told me he'd been watching me and that I spent way too much time chatting with customers. He said from now on, I needed to keep it strictly business, just ask cash or card, say have a nice day, and move on to the next person. He called my conversations with customers chatty nonsense and said no one cared about them. I was pretty annoyed, but I needed the job, so I just nodded and said, okay. But then I had an idea. If he wanted efficiency and no conversation, that's exactly what he'd get. The next day, I came in and became a complete robot. When customers approached my register, I wouldn't even look up. I'd just start scanning their items in silence, state the total in a flat voice and ask whether they wanted cash or card. No greeting, no small talk, no eye contact, nothing. At first, customers were confused. They tried to make conversation, ask questions about products, or just be friendly, and I'd just stare blankly and repeat the total. When one customer asked if a drill bit would work for masonry, I just asked him cash or card. He seemed confused and repeated his question about the drill bit, so I told him store policy was to keep transactions efficient and asked again about his payment method. The old gentleman who comes in every Saturday was especially confused. He tried to tell me about his latest project, and I just stood there scanning his items without responding. He asked if I was okay and said I was usually so chatty. I just told him it was store policy and asked how he wanted to pay. He looked really hurt and confused and I felt bad, but I was following orders exactly how they were given. Word started getting around among the regular customers that something was off. People who used to enjoy coming to our store were having weird, uncomfortable experiences. The friendly neighborhood hardware store atmosphere was completely gone, replaced by this cold, corporate efficiency. After about a week of this, I noticed fewer familiar faces coming in. Sales were definitely down because our regulars were starting to shop elsewhere. The manager kept giving me these looks, like he knew something was wrong but couldn't figure out what. Then yesterday, everything came to a head. A customer who'd been shopping here for over 10 years went to the manager to complain. He told the manager he'd been coming to this store for a decade and had never had such a terrible experience. He said I acted like he didn't exist, wouldn't answer questions, and wouldn't even look at him. He said the place had completely lost its charm, and that he used to love coming here because the staff actually cared about helping customers. Now it felt like some soulless corporate chain, and he was taking his business elsewhere. The manager tried to calm him down, but the customer was really upset and left angry. After the customer left, the manager came over to my register. He was trying to look stern, but I could tell he was panicking inside. He asked what was going on with my customer service, and I told him I was following his instructions exactly. Scan items, state total, cash or card, next customer, maximum efficiency just like he wanted. When he said customers were complaining, I reminded him that I was doing exactly what he told me to do. I pointed out that he'd said no one cared about conversations and to keep things strictly business. He stood there for a moment, realizing he was trapped. He couldn't discipline me for following his direct orders, but he also couldn't ignore the fact that his efficiency policy was driving away loyal customers. He suggested maybe I could be a little more friendly, but I asked if he was changing his previous instructions. I reminded him that he'd specifically told me to stop with the chatty nonsense and keep it strictly business. He was getting red again, but this time from frustration rather than anger. He mumbled something about using common sense and walked away. Today I'm still playing the robot cashier role. More customers have complained, and I heard the store owner is asking questions about why sales are down. The manager keeps shooting me angry looks, but he can't say anything because I'm following his orders perfectly. He's been hovering around the front of the store, jumping in to help customers when he sees them getting frustrated with my robot act. But he can't be everywhere at once, and he's clearly stressed about the situation he created. Meanwhile, I just keep scanning items and asking cash or card with the same blank expression. It's actually kind of relaxing, in a weird way. No thinking required, no customer service skills needed, just pure efficiency exactly how he requested. I wonder how long it'll take before he either admits his policy was wrong or finds some excuse to change it without losing face. Either way, I'll keep being the perfect, efficient employee he asked for until he figures out what he really wants. Karen was hired at my workplace 6 months ago. From day one, Karen acted like she owned the place. She'd show up late, complain about everything, and treat customers like they were bothering her just by existing. The worst part was how she talked to the kitchen staff. These are hard-working people who barely speak English, and she'd mock their accents and act like they were stupid. I complained to my manager about her behavior multiple times, but he kept saying he needed to give her more chances. Karen had this thing where she thought certain customers were beneath her. If someone looked like they couldn't afford to tip well, or if they had kids who were being a little loud, or if they asked too many questions about the menu, she'd get this nasty attitude. She'd roll her eyes, sigh dramatically, and sometimes even make snide comments loud enough for them to hear. Last Tuesday started like any other day. I was working the morning shift, and Karen came in around noon for the lunch rush. She was already in a bad mood because she'd been scheduled to work a double. The restaurant was pretty busy, and we had this family with 2 young kids at table 6. The kids were maybe 4 and 6 years old, not being too loud or anything, just normal kid behavior. The family ordered pretty standard stuff, but the dad politely asked Karen to make sure his daughter's chicken nuggets weren't too hot because she'd burned her mouth the day before. Karen immediately got that look on her face and sarcastically asked how hot chicken nuggets could possibly be. The dad stayed polite and just repeated that his daughter had a sensitive mouth right now. Karen walked off to put in the order, but I could see her muttering complaints the whole time. When the food came up, I watched Karen grab the plate with the chicken nuggets. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, then leaned over the plate. I was shocked at what I was seeing. She actually spit right on the chicken nuggets. Not just a little bit either, like a full-on gross spit. I just stood there for a second. By the time I snapped out of it, she was already walking toward table 6 with the plate. I quickly caught up to her and grabbed her arm, demanding to know what she had just done. Karen told me to mind my own business, but I said I saw her spit on that food and that she couldn't serve that to a kid. She got defensive and said that annoying dad deserved it for making special requests like she was his personal servant. I tried to take the plate from her, but she pulled away and kept walking. I had no choice but to go straight to my manager's office. He was doing paperwork when I burst in and told him he needed to come out immediately because Karen had just spit in a customer's food and was about to serve it. My manager dropped his pen and followed me out. We got to the dining room just when Karen was setting the plate down in front of the little girl. My manager immediately stepped in and told Karen he needed to speak with her in the kitchen right away. Karen said she was busy with customers, but my manager insisted it had to be now. Karen reluctantly followed him to the kitchen. I stayed close enough to hear everything. My manager confronted her about spitting in the food, and at first she tried to deny it. But when he said I witnessed it and he was checking the security cameras, she got defensive. Karen admitted she did it and said so what, claiming that guy was being a pain with his stupid requests. My manager told her that spitting in food served to a child was disgusting and probably illegal, and that she was fired. He told her to get her things and leave. That's when Karen completely lost it. She started screaming about how the job was beneath her anyway, and how all the customers were idiots. My manager turned around to grab something from his desk, probably to write up an incident report. Karen picked up one of the metal chairs we use in the break area and raised it over her head. Before anyone could react, she brought it down hard on the back of my manager's head. The sound was horrible, like a crack mixed with a thud. My manager collapsed forward onto his desk. Karen stood over him and asked sarcastically how he liked that, calling him a piece of garbage. I screamed and ran to help my manager, who was bleeding from his head but still conscious. Other employees came running and someone called 911 immediately. Karen just stood there holding the chair, looking almost surprised at what she'd done. The police showed up within minutes. When they walked into the kitchen, Karen still had the chair in her hands. The officers told her to drop it and put her hands up. Instead, she swung the chair at the first officer who approached her. The lead officer shouted for her to drop the weapon and get on the ground, but Karen yelled back that she wasn't going anywhere and that this was all their fault. She kept swinging the chair wildly, trying to hit anyone who came near her. The officers had no choice but to use their tasers. Karen went down immediately, convulsing on the kitchen floor. They cuffed her while she was still twitching from the electricity. The paramedics arrived and took my manager to the hospital. Luckily, he ended up being okay, just needed stitches and had a concussion. Karen was arrested for assault with a deadly weapon and food tampering. The family whose food she spit in was horrified when we told them what happened, but they were grateful we caught it in time. Karen is facing serious charges now, and word got around town pretty quickly about what happened. I heard she can't even get a job at fast food places anymore because everyone knows what she did. My manager came back to work after a week, and he thanked me for speaking up when I did. The security footage of her getting tased went viral on social media after someone leaked it. Now everyone can see exactly what happens when entitled people think they can get away with anything. I'm 14 and get overwhelmed easily. Loud noises, too much going on at once, it all just makes my brain feel like it's buzzing. I've had insomnia since I was 12, so sleep is already hard for me. My dad works steel construction and travels a lot, so it's usually just me, my mom, and my older sister at home. My sister is 33 and moved back in with us when she got pregnant. The baby's father didn't want anything to do with either of them, so she left him and came home. She had a job before the baby was born, but she quit to take care of her when she was a newborn. That was 3 months ago. When summer break started, I was so excited to finally relax. School is exhausting for me because of all the noise and chaos, and I just wanted to sleep in and maybe hang out with my friends. But my sister had other plans. My sister told me she got a job at the same place as mom working the night shift. I was happy for her at first. Then she explained that I would need to watch the baby during the day while she slept, and at night while she was at work. I felt my stomach drop. I'd never taken care of a baby before. I didn't know the first thing about it. When I suggested that maybe she could find a daycare instead, she said daycare costs money she didn't have. Besides, I was here anyway, so it shouldn't be that hard. But it was hard. Really hard. The baby cried constantly and I never knew why. Was she hungry, tired, sick? I was always scared I was doing something wrong. I couldn't even nap during the day because I was terrified something would happen if I wasn't watching her every second. The worst part was at night. My sister would leave for work, and I'd be alone with the baby for hours. Every little sound she made sent me into a panic. When she coughed even slightly while eating, I thought she was choking. When she slept too quietly, I worried she wasn't breathing. I'd check on her constantly, which meant I barely slept at all. After 2 weeks of this, I was exhausted and desperate. I tried talking to my mom. I told her I really couldn't keep doing this because I wasn't sleeping and I didn't know what I was doing with the baby. She just said I had to deal with it because my sister needed this job. I explained that I was worried about what would happen if something went wrong. I didn't know CPR or anything, and what if the baby got hurt because I didn't know what I was doing? My mom said I was being dramatic and that babies weren't that fragile. All I had to do was feed her and change her diaper, and it wasn't rocket science. But my mom didn't understand. She and my sister both worked night shifts, so they were tired when they got home in the morning. They'd sleep until the afternoon. which meant I was watching the baby even longer than just during their work hours. They expected me to sleep while babysitting, but I couldn't. Every fiber of my being was on high alert. I called my dad one evening, hoping he'd understand. When he asked how my summer was going, I told him it wasn't great because I was babysitting the baby all the time and really struggling. He said it was tough and that he wished he could help, but he was stuck on his job site for another month. When I mentioned asking about daycare, he said that family helps family and maybe it would get easier. Even my dad, who usually got me, didn't seem to understand how overwhelmed I was. 3 weeks into this nightmare, I reached my breaking point. My sister was getting ready for work, and I felt like I was going to have a panic attack just thinking about another sleepless night. She told me she was leaving in 10 minutes and that the baby had just eaten, so she should be good for a few hours. I said I couldn't do this anymore because I hadn't slept properly in weeks. She told me to stop being such a baby and reminded me that she had to take care of her alone for 3 months before she got this job. I pointed out that she chose to have a baby, but I didn't choose this. She said that since I lived there for free, I needed to contribute somehow. That night after she left for work, I made a decision. I packed a small bag, wrote a note saying I was staying at my friend's house, and snuck out. For the first time in weeks, I slept for 8 straight hours. The next morning, my phone was blowing up with missed calls and angry texts. I came home to find my mom and sister waiting for me in the living room. My mom asked how I could abandon a baby like that. My sister said she had to leave work early and come home when she saw my note and asked if I knew how that looked. I told them I had said I couldn't handle it anymore. My sister called me selfish and lazy, saying all I had to do was make sure the baby didn't die. My mom said my sister was trying to get her life together and I was sabotaging her. I shouted back that I was 14 and should be sleeping in during summer break, not taking care of someone else's baby. When my sister said the baby was my niece, I told her I loved my niece, but that didn't mean I should be her full-time babysitter. The argument went on for an hour. My sister was furious, my mom was disappointed, and I felt terrible but also relieved that I finally stood up for myself. My sister said that if I was going to be like this, she'd just quit her job. I suggested she could find actual childcare instead. She asked with what money and said I'd ruined everything just when she was finally getting back on her feet. She did quit her job the next day. The whole house was tense for weeks afterward. My mom barely spoke to me except to make snide comments about how I'd ruined my sister's chances at independence. My sister acted like I personally destroyed her life. But then something interesting happened. About a month later, I overheard my mom on the phone with my aunt. She was saying she didn't know what they were thinking, that I was just a kid myself, and they should have figured something else out. A few days after that, my sister approached me while I was in my room. She said sorry and that she was desperate and had put too much on me. I said sorry too and that I didn't want to hurt her chances at getting a job. She told me she had talked to some people at the community center and found out there was a program that helps single mothers with childcare costs. She was going to apply. I said that was great. Then she asked if maybe when she did get another job I could just help out sometimes when I wanted to, not every single day. I told her I could do that. It took a while, but she got approved for the childcare assistance program and found another job. I still help out with my niece sometimes, but now it's because I want to, not because I have to. And I actually enjoy spending time with her when I'm not completely overwhelmed and sleep deprived. I'm in my early 20s and work at a mid-sized office where I've been for about 8 months now. It's my first real job after college. And honestly, I was just grateful to land something in my field. The pay isn't amazing, but it's steady work and I'm learning a lot. Most of my co-workers are pretty decent people, which makes what I'm about to tell you even more frustrating. When I started, everyone warned me about one co-worker. Let's call her Karen. She's this woman in her 60s who's been at the company for over 15 years. Because she's been there longer than almost everyone else, she acts like she owns the place. And I mean literally acts like it. From day one, Karen made it clear that she thought she was above everyone else. She'd bark orders at people, interrupt meetings to correct minor details, and had this habit of just saying, move instead of excuse me when she needed to get past someone. I watched her do this to our actual boss multiple times, and somehow he just laughed it off like it was charming. What really got to me was how she never admitted when she was wrong. I remember one time she insisted a client's order was for blue folders when the email clearly said red. When I showed her the email on my screen, she just waved her hand and said the client must have changed their mind. Spoiler alert, they hadn't. We had to rush order red folders because Karen refused to acknowledge her mistake. But here's the kicker. Everyone loves her. I'm not exaggerating. Whenever I tried to vent to coworkers about her behavior, they'd give me responses about how that's just how she is or how she's been here so long that she's earned the right to be a little bossy. Some people even told me I should show her more respect because of her seniority. It was like working in some weird alternate reality where being rude and demanding was considered endearing. The breaking point came about 3 weeks ago. I was on my lunch break sitting at one of the tables in our break room. I had my backpack on the floor next to my chair while I ate my sandwich and scrolled through my phone. Karen came walking over with her usual attitude. She demanded that I move my bag because she needed to sit there. I looked up at her, then at the completely empty table right next to us, then back at her. I pointed out that there was literally an empty table right there. She told me she didn't want to sit there and wanted to sit at my table instead. She repeated her demand for me to move my bag. Now I've been dealing with this woman's attitude for months. I'd watched her treat everyone like her personal servants, and I was fed up. But I tried to keep it professional. I suggested to her that maybe she should treat me with the same respect I treat her with. She stared at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. Then she crossed her arms and repeated her demand more firmly, emphasizing each word. I could feel my patience wearing thin, but I kept my voice calm and simply asked her to ask nicely. What happened next still makes me question reality. This 60-something-year-old woman who regularly told our boss what to do started crying. Not just a little tear, full-on sobbing. Her face got all red and blotchy, and she started making these dramatic gasping sounds. I sat there completely stunned when one of my coworkers rushed over and put her arm around Karen. My coworker asked what was wrong and what had happened. Karen told her that I was being so mean to her and that all she wanted was for me to move my bag. The coworker shot me a dirty look while Karen continued her performance. I was so shocked that I couldn't even defend myself properly. I just grabbed my water bottle and told them I was going to the bathroom. In the bathroom, I stared at myself in the mirror trying to process what had just happened. A grown woman had started crying because I asked her to say please. The same woman who regularly told people to move like they were obstacles in her path couldn't handle being asked for basic politeness. I decided to cover my bases and stopped by human resources on my way back. I explained the situation to our HR representative, keeping it factual and calm. She listened, took notes, and said she'd have a conversation with Karen about workplace communication. When I got back to the break room, my backpack was gone. I found it stuffed into one of the employee lockers, and Karen was sitting at her table looking smug despite the dried tear tracks on her cheeks. That's when the real anxiety kicked in. What had she told that coworker who comforted her? Was she spinning some story about how I'd attacked her or threatened her? I started worrying that she might try to get me fired. After all, she had 15 years of goodwill built up with everyone, and I was just the new guy who'd made the precious office queen cry. The next few days were tense. I caught some coworkers giving me weird looks, and I overheard whispered conversations that stopped when I walked by. But my direct supervisor pulled me aside and told me something that gave me hope. He said he'd heard about what happened with Karen and wanted me to know that I had every right to expect professional behavior from my coworkers. He told me not to let anyone tell me otherwise. It wasn't a complete endorsement, but it was something. At least management wasn't automatically taking her side. The real vindication came a week later. I was working late when I overheard Karen on a phone call in the next cubicle. She was talking to someone about the disrespectful young man who'd made her cry, but she was embellishing the story. According to her version, I'd yelled at her and called her names. What she didn't know was that our HR representative was also working late and heard every word. The next morning, Karen got called into a meeting that lasted over an hour. When she came out, her face was pale, and she wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. Later, my supervisor told me that Karen had been given a formal warning about her behavior and would be required to attend sensitivity training. Apparently, HR had also reviewed the security footage from the break room, which showed that I'd remained calm the entire time while she'd escalated to tears over being asked to say please. 2 days later, I was getting coffee in the break room when Karen needed to get past me to reach the refrigerator. Instead of her usual move command, she politely said, "Excuse me and ask please." I stepped aside and smiled, telling her of course and wishing her a great day. She mumbled something that might have been thank you and scurried away. It's been quiet since then. Karen still acts like she runs the place, but she's noticeably more careful around me. And whenever I catch her about to bark an order at someone, I just look at her and raise an eyebrow. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.